One DNA marker found in Japan, found in Tibet, and almost nowhere in the 4,000 kilometers between them, not in China, not in Korea, not in the populations that geographically connect these two places. Just present, then absent, then present again, like a signal that somehow jumped across a continent and left no trail. Geneticists noticed this anomaly decades ago, and the more carefully they looked, the stranger it became. Because this isn't a minor statistical quirk. This is a lineage carried by 1 in 3 Japanese men alive today. It is written in the blood of 125 million people. And science still has not fully explained how it got there. I want to start with the numbers because they are what stopped me cold. Haplogroup DM174 is a Y-Chromosome lineage passed exclusively from father to son, unchanged across generations. A direct thread connecting a man alive today to an ancestor who walked the earth 60,000 years ago. In Tibet, this marker appears in roughly 50% of the male population. In Japan, it appears in approximately 33%. In the Ainu people of northern Hokkaido, it reaches 87%. And in Han Chinese, the 1.4 billion people who live between Japan and Tibet, it appears in fewer than 3%. In Korea, which sits directly between Japan and the Asian mainland, it drops to under 4%. This distribution pattern is so unusual that when researchers at BMC Biology published a study analyzing over 5,000 male samples from 73 East Asian populations, they described it plainly. The fragmented distribution of DM174 is inconsistent with every standard model of how humans moved through Asia. It breaks the map. And to understand why it breaks the map, you need to understand what the map was supposed to look like. For most of the 20th century, the accepted story of human migration through Asia followed a clean logic. Modern humans left Africa approximately 60,000 years ago, moved along the southern coast of the continent, entered South Asia, and then spread northward and eastward through the Asian landmass in successive waves. Each wave left a genetic signature. Populations that shared geography shared ancestry. The closer two groups lived to each other, the more DNA they should share. This model produced tidy results almost everywhere it was tested. Then researchers applied it to East Asia and found haplogroup D waiting in exactly the wrong places. Tibet is a high-altitude plateau sealed behind the Himalayas, one of the most geographically isolated regions on Earth. Japan is an island chain separated from the mainland by open ocean. Neither place should be a hotspot for a lineage that supposedly originated in Africa and migrated through southern Asia. And yet there it is, in 1 in 3 Japanese men, in 1 in 2 Tibetan men, and almost nowhere in between. The early response was to call it an anomaly and move on. That response lasted about 30 years. Then ancient DNA technology arrived, and the anomaly became the story. But here is the part about Tibet that stopped me completely. Because the story of how they survived at altitude goes somewhere I did not expect at all. Tibetans don't just carry haplogroup D at high frequencies, they carry something else alongside it that makes their survival at altitude one of the most extraordinary genetic stories in all of human biology. The EPAS1 gene, which regulates how the body responds to low oxygen, exists in a variant in Tibetan populations that is found almost nowhere else among living humans. This variant allows Tibetan people to thrive at altitudes above 4,000 meters that would kill most people within days. Researchers assumed this adaptation evolved slowly over thousands of years of mountain living. Then in 2014, a study published in Nature revealed the truth. This specific EPAS1 variant was not evolved by Tibetans at all. It was inherited from Denisovans, an entirely separate human species that went extinct approximately 50,000 years ago. The D-carrying ancestors of the Tibetan people did not just survive in the Himalayas because of geography. They survived because they interbred with an archaic human species that had already adapted to those conditions over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. The haplogroup D lineage in Tibet is not just ancient modern human DNA. It is sitting alongside actual Denisovan genetic material, absorbed tens of thousands of years ago, and then selected for so powerfully that it now exists in the majority of Tibetan people living today. The people who preserved haplogroup D on the Tibetan plateau did so partly because they carried biology that no longer exists in any other living human species. And when I looked at how the marker is distributed across Japan specifically, I realized I wasn't looking at a genetics chart at all. When geneticists mapped DM55 across Japan, the distribution that emerged was not random. It forms a distinctive U shape, highest in the far north among the Ainu of Hokkaido at 87%, highest in the far south among the Ryukyuans of Okinawa at over 60%, and lowest in central western Japan, the Kinki and Chugoku regions, at around 25%. That low frequency band in the center marks the exact landing point of the Yayoi migration. Where Yayoi farmers arrived first and in greatest numbers, the D lineage was most diluted. The further from that entry point, the more ancient Jomon DNA survived. The distribution map of a single Y-chromosome marker is simultaneously a precise map of a 3,000-year-old population replacement. You can read the invasion from the genetics alone, without a single archaeological artifact. And when I understood that, I needed to know who those people actually were, the ones the map was slowly erasing. And I want to tell you who the D carriers of Japan actually were, because this lineage doesn't belong to an abstraction. It belongs to a civilization that built something the rest of the world hadn't even imagined yet. The Jomon people, the D-carrying original inhabitants of Japan, made the world's oldest known pottery at the Odai Yamamoto site in Aomori more than 16,000 years ago. 2 full millennia before anyone in Mesopotamia shaped a clay vessel. These were not primitive foragers scratching at the margins of survival. They were the world's most technologically advanced culture at the moment of their greatest innovation. They built permanent settlements, developed complex spiritual practices, and populated the Japanese archipelago for over 10,000 years before the Yayoi arrived. And then, within a few centuries of that arrival, the Jomon were genetically absorbed into near invisibility. The people who invented pottery left behind almost no autosomal DNA in the modern Japanese population. Roughly 12% of the average Japanese person's genome traces back to the Jomon. The civilization that dominated these islands for 10 millennia was reduced to a trace, but their Y-chromosome survived, carried forward at 33% by the very people who replaced them. The D lineage is not just a genetic marker, it is the last clear signal from a civilization that the archaeological record can barely hear anymore. And then I found the third survivor, and that is when the full scale of what happened became impossible to ignore. Japan, Tibet. And then, on a remote archipelago in the Indian Ocean, more than 4,000 kilometers from the nearest major landmass, the Andaman Islands. The Andamanese, specifically the Onge and Jarawa peoples, are among the most isolated human populations on Earth. Their ancestors have lived on those islands for at least 30,000 years with almost zero genetic contact with the outside world. And they carry haplogroup D at over 56%, not the same subclade as Japan or Tibet. The Japanese carry DM55, the Tibetans carry DM15, the Andamanese carry a separate branch called D1A2B. But these 3 subclades all descend from the same founding population. Genetic analysis shows the Japanese and Andamanese lineages diverged from each other approximately 53,000 years ago. The Tibetan lineage split from the Japanese lineage at roughly the same depth. 3 populations, 3 remote refugees, 1 ancient ancestor. The Andamanese are the control group in a 30,000-year natural experiment. Japan and Tibet kept receiving outside DNA, Yayoi migrants, Kofun period arrivals, Han agricultural admixture, and their D percentages fell accordingly. The Andamanese received nothing. Their D frequency stayed above 50%, and their existence confirms the core finding. Haplogroup D was not confined to Japan and Tibet because it originated there. It was confined there because it was erased from everywhere else. When I understood that, I had to find what did the erasing, and the answer turned out to be something much bigger than I expected. Beginning approximately 6,000 years ago, a new Y-chromosome lineage began expanding across East Asia with a speed and completeness that has few parallels in human prehistory. Haplogroup OM175, carried by the ancestors of Han Chinese agricultural populations, spread across the mainland in tandem with the expansion of wet rice and millet farming. Farming populations could support vastly larger numbers of people than hunter-gatherers. More people meant more Y-chromosomes. Over generations, the D-carrying populations of mainland Asia were not killed. They were numerically overwhelmed. Today, haplogroup O accounts for roughly 75% of Chinese male lineages. The D carriers who once ranged across the continent were pushed to the edges of the world, behind ocean, behind mountains, to islands too remote to reach. Geography became the last line of defense for a lineage 60,000 years old. And when I looked at why the DM55 frequency in Japan is nearly 3 times higher than the Jomon's overall DNA contribution, I found something I genuinely did not expect. And it changes how the entire replacement story reads. Modern Japanese people derive approximately 88% of their autosomal DNA, the genetic material inherited from both parents, from the Yayoi migrants. Only 12% comes from the Jomon. But DM55, the Jomon Y-Chromosome, survives in 33% of Japanese men today. The Jomon contribution to the Y-Chromosome is nearly 3 times larger than their contribution to the rest of the genome. Geneticists call this male-biased gene flow, and the explanation is specific and uncomfortable. The pattern suggests that Jomon men reproduced successfully with Yayoi women, while Jomon women were far less likely to reproduce with Yayoi men. In practical terms, this means the population replacement was not symmetrical. Yayoi men brought their own paternal lineages and reproduced with Jomon women, diluting Jomon maternal DNA rapidly. Meanwhile, Jomon men reproduced enough with incoming Yayoi women to preserve their Y chromosome at a frequency far above what their overall genomic survival would predict. The Y chromosome survived not because the Jomon people survived as a whole. It survived because Jomon men did, specifically, at a rate their women did not. The D lineage in Japan today is the genetic echo of that asymmetry, the last trace of a population that was absorbed, not destroyed, and absorbed in a way that was not equal between the sexes. The secret 125 million Japanese people are still carrying is not, at its core, about Japan. It is about what East Asia looked like before farming, before the Han expansion, before the Neolithic transformation that reshaped every population on the continent. The D carriers of ancient Asia were not a small isolated tribe who stumbled into Japan and Tibet by accident. They were the earliest settlers of the entire region. The people who arrived 60,000 years ago when the continent was empty, who spread across the land, who lived as hunter-gatherers for tens of thousands of years, and who were then gradually replaced by the demographic force of agriculture. Japan and Tibet did not acquire something rare. They preserved something universal. What makes them unusual is not what they have. It is what everyone else lost. And here's the one finding that changes how the whole story reads. The Japanese DM55 subclade and the Tibetan DM15 subclade diverged from each other approximately 53,000 years ago. These are not populations that split from a recent common ancestor. They share an ancestor so ancient that by the time these two lineages were distinct, modern humans had not yet reached Europe. What this means is that Tibet and Japan did not receive haplogroup D from each other. They received it independently from the same vast ancient dispersal that once covered the continent. The silence between them is not absence. It is the graveyard of 60,000 years of human history, buried under the expansion of a farming civilization so successful it overwrote the world. And inside the Y chromosome of roughly 1 in 3 Japanese men is a direct genetic thread, unbroken, unchanged, reaching back to the earliest wave of modern humans to enter Asia. Not the Yayoi farmers who built Japanese civilization as we recognize it. Not the Kofun period migrants who brought continental culture to the archipelago. The people before all of that. The people who crossed into the Japanese islands when the sea levels were lower and the land bridges still existed. Who made pottery 16,000 years ago while Mesopotamia was still silent, and who left their genetic marks so deeply embedded in the Japanese paternal lineage that 60,000 years of subsequent history, farming revolutions, imperial dynasties, and cultural transformations could not remove it. The Ainu of Hokkaido carry it at 87%. The Ryukyuans of Okinawa carry it at over 60%. And the average Japanese man on a Tokyo street carries it at 33%, 1 in 3, walking through a city built on the land those original people first settled, still carrying in their cells the proof that those people were there. And on the Tibetan plateau, the descendants of the same ancient wave carry not just the D lineage, but Denisovan DNA inside their EPAS1 gene, extinct human biology that kept them alive at altitude, inherited from a species that no longer exists, still doing its work inside living human bodies today. The lineage is 60,000 years old. It was everywhere, and in the places it survived, it left behind something that no subsequent history has been able to erase. If you made it here, thank you. That means something. If this gave you something worth keeping, a like is the easiest way to give something back, and it genuinely helps more people find it. For anyone who keeps returning to these subjects, the lineages that should have disappeared and didn't, the science that rewrites what history books couldn't see, the populations that survived simply because geography ran out of options. Subscribing is how you don't miss what comes next. Pass this along to someone who has ever wondered why certain people ended up in certain places and stayed there for 60,000 years. And if a specific moment stuck with you, the 3 refugees at the edges of the world, the Denisovan inheritance still breathing inside Tibetan lungs, the one unbroken thread, leave it below. I read every one of them. Thanks for watching.